Welcome to this talk on UnBias AI for Decision Makers, a critical systems thinking toolkit. My name is Ansgar Kuna. I'm the Global AI Ethics and Regulatory Leader at EY and a Senior Research Fellow at the Horizon Digital Economy Research Institute of the University of Nottingham. So why might we need a critical systems thinking toolkit for AI ethics? As most clearly demonstrated by the recent problems with the algorithmic adjustment of grade estimates for A-level students, the use of algorithmic systems in applications with real-world consequences can have significant ethical, regulatory, and governance implications. Much effort in the last 2 years has gone into devising AI ethics principles, such as those that were published by the OECD and ratified by G20 countries. While AI ethics principles are an important first step, they are meaningless unless they get translated into practical guidance and requirements. When considering the practical implications of AI ethics, it's important to recognize that AI applications are most often just a small part of larger systems. Responsible development and use of AI systems therefore involves many stakeholders within an organization. So let us consider, for instance, the AI principles that were published by the OECD. They state AI systems should promote inclusive growth, sustainable development and well-being, human-centered values and fairness, transparency and explainability, robustness, security and safety, and accountability. Let's add some markers to keep track of these principles. So how might one apply these ethics principles to an AI application, such as, for instance, an AI for assessing CVs as part of job recruitment? Considering the sensitivity of discrimination based on gender, race, or other sensitive characteristics in recruitment, fairness is likely to be one of the first issues we might think about in this example. So let's put that one here in the middle. So fairness in this case would clearly relate to people, primarily to the candidates who are applying for the job. So let's add people. Now, fair assessment of the candidates clearly also relates to the well-being principle. Now, the well-being principle would cover more than just the fairness around the applicants. It would also relate to the well-being of the people working in the HR department, whose workload is being reduced by the AI system. But it would also impact on the well-being of existing employees, such as what kind of new candidates will be joining them, is there a good fit there? But importantly, well-being also looks beyond the direct impact to things like societal well-being or even more broadly ecological well-being. And the societal well-being, for instance, the AI recruitment case could be seen to have an impact because if a candidate of a certain community gets the job, then that candidate will be able to spend money in his community and therefore impact the socioeconomic situation within the whole community they're in. So when considering how an AI system touches on the various people at the organization, we can also reflect again on the ethics principles and see that there's clearly a link to the accountability principle. Accountability being a question of who in the organization is accountable for the performance of the AI system. Addressing the question of accountability means thinking about the organization as governance structure. So let's add governance as well. Now, we're starting to build out not just the principles as they were listed in the OECD's principles, but we're starting to add into this also organizational drivers, organizational groups that are related to these principles. So part of the role of the organizational governance is to define oversight mechanisms. So let's add oversight, and this would include transparency, which is one of the elements we picked up from the ethics principle. Now, regarding transparency, we might ask, what are the organizational policies around internal and external transparency concerning simply even the fact that an AI is used in the CV assessment? Or what level of transparency should be used about the way that the AI system works and the data that it uses? So data, let's add that. Now, possible bias in the data will obviously play an important role in determining the fairness of the CV assessments, which is why I've decided to add data close to fairness here. Now, naturally, for any system that uses data and relates to people, we must also take into consideration questions around privacy implications. So let's add this one in. Now, privacy implications obviously would involve things like data protection officers and other compliance processes. So compliance is another important aspect to include. If we consider again the OECD's AI principles, we can note that we have not yet addressed the safety or security aspects. Now, security is obviously a factor regarding the storage and handling of the data, so that has implications for privacy. So we can add security, clearly. But given the nature of the AI for CV assessment use case, safety is probably not a significant factor, unless, of course, we're using the AI also for doing some kind of background checks around safety-sensitive jobs. But generally speaking, safety will not really be an issue. So after due considerations, we can decide to remove that hex tile from our consideration space. Now, if we look at this, interestingly, we already have created quite a broad picture of drivers and outcomes that need to be considered as part of our AI ethics assessment without even having addressed the chosen AI technology as such, which, of course, would potentially impact things like fairness. So technology, I mean things like the actual decision as to what type of learning system or whether or not even to use a learning system in this application. Okay, so let's add technology. So now the choice of technology will impact things like the types of risks that the AI system may be exposed to. If we're using a continuously learning system, then we have a different type of risks around drift in the parameters. It will be potentially more difficult to rebalance the system if the incoming data points are not equally distributed over different population groups, for instance. So the choice of technology will impact the type of risks that the AI system may be exposed to. So we'll add risks as a potential outcome factor that needs to be considered. What kind of risks are acceptable will depend on the operational strategy that an organization is using. So strategy is probably another important element to add in, so let's put this into our map of things that need to be considered. Strategy in this case really refers to the business case, the value proposition for the AI system, including considerations around the organization's reputation, for instance. So how does reputation play a role? Reputation will obviously be connected to things like the well-being experienced by people, also to things like fairness and risk that is being exposed to. Okay, so this is an incomplete, but let's more or less leave it at this, kind of a mosaic of various factors that we would need to consider in order to really understand the different aspects that play a role around AI ethics. But one important one which we haven't added yet really is sort of the overarching ethos and values that the organization itself holds. This kind of ethos will basically determine things like what strategy will look like, what kind of emphasis is being put on different aspects, such as privacy or fairness questions, what kind of transparency levels to take. So let's add one more tile, the ethos and values tile. Now, in addition to providing trigger words for stimulated thinking about different organizational drivers and outcomes that need to be considered, which is basically what I've been going through in the last couple of minutes here, each of the hex cards in the toolkit also provides a set of questions on its reverse side to prompt further discussion. For the ethos and values card, for instance, this provides the following prompt, which is what is your organization's ethos, its mission, vision, values, and ethics? Have you adopted an existing AI ethics framework? How is it being implemented across your operations? How does the AI system integrate and reflect your ethos and values? For the fairness card, as a different example, the card provides the following prompt. How will you ensure that AI and automated decision-making are fair and equitable? Do they unjustly harm, exclude, disempower, or discriminate against any individual or particular group? How might they amplify existing biases and prejudice? Are costs and benefits equally distributed? And just as a final example, on the governance card, for instance, it just raises the question, what governance structures are planned or already in place for using AI? What is the chain of responsibility? So the toolkit is being designed to help explore how AI systems align with an organization's ethos, its mission, vision, and values across business structures and operations. It contains 19 tiles to reflect on 19 factors, 1 ethos and value card in green, 6 operational drivers in blue, and 12 outcome dimensions in red. The cards can be arranged in any order to evaluate and assess alignments, misalignments, and the key relationships that link operations and outputs. The cards can be used for planning, designing, and developing an AI system, or post-deployment they can assist with ongoing monitoring and critical evaluation. Basically, they help to map the complexities of AI governance and policies against critical issues such as trust, reliability, quality assurance, due diligence, and ethics. The UnBias AI for Decision Making Toolkit was commissioned by EY and is published under Creative Commons license. So it's available free online as a DIY print and play. There's also a version available that can be ordered in a pre-printed version. The new UnBias AI for Decision Makers Toolkit is spiritually an expansion of a previous one, the UnBias Awareness Cards, that have been produced under the UnBias Research Project, which was an EPSRC-funded project led by the Horizon Research Institute at the University of Nottingham, together with the University of Oxford and Edinburgh. That toolkit is also published under Creative Commons and again available free online. The focus was slightly different. The focus in the awareness cards was more on end users, people who would be, so to speak, at the receiving end of the algorithmic systems, to help them understand better how these kinds of systems function, what the concerns are around those, why they collect various types of data and those kinds of questions. Whereas the new toolkit is focusing on the decision makers, the creators, the deployers of these AI systems. So, thank you very much.